Well, hey, Dave Melenda here, Positive Polarity Podcast. Hope things are going awesome for you. I got a killer question for you this week, and it is so outside your comfort zone, but it's going to be awesome. And the question is, when is the last time you had to make a decision, a split decision at 800 miles an hour? And so I found somebody that knows how to answer that question. So I'm honored to be hanging out with Dominic Teich. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on your show.
Absolutely. You're founder of Single Seat Mindset, and you're a U.S. Air Force fighter pilot. So thank you so much for your service. And I'm honored to be with you today. And so I have to ask the question first, what is Single Seat Mindset?
So Single Seat Mindset is I'm tracking the largest group of fighter pilots online. And we got together a number of years ago during COVID, actually, and started writing some books, which then kind of splintered off from there. So we learned that, there's even business owners, as we were writing our stories, there's a lot of trends and things that fighter pilots do that are very leverageable for peak performing professions. So doctors,
Sure.
business owners, entrepreneurs, clearly fighter pilots, professional athletes. But even myself, I don't like rigid protocols. And so we learned that fighter pilots are trained. And I think that's the big thing that a lot of your listeners can get out of today is that it's a learned behavior. You don't
Sure.
just step into a fighter jet and know how to fly it, right? It takes many years to get there.
Sure.
But because you're trained at 800 plus miles an hour, those decision-making skills are very leverageable into other peak performing professions. So that's kind of the genesis of Single Seat Mindset. Was it I remember looking at my brother when he was visiting. I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do during COVID. This sucks, but I'm going to build something. And
Sure.
I had already written a book at that time for another business. I had started a real estate business that was kind of churning at that point. And I was like, there's something here. So
Okay.
let's make some money. Let's do a big idea. Let's write another book. Let's do something.
Sure.
While everybody's wallowing in their own self-pity. So that's kind of where it grew from.
That's awesome. Well, I tell you, you hit on two powerful words there, and that's peak performance. And I'm not sure that we as entrepreneurs, Dominic, really probably operate in that space on a daily basis. I mean, a lot of times we're trying to pay the bills. We're trying to satisfy a customer. I feel like from my experience, from the people that I've talked to, we live on the defense a lot. We react. And I'm just curious, as a fighter pilot, you're acting way more than you're reacting, I'm guessing, aren't you?
Yeah. So I think there's, I'm glad you said that, because it kind of makes me think of, when I was back on my heels as a business owner,
Yeah.
what really helped was going to bed earlier. And I know it's an oversimplification. There's more to it than that. But when I
Sure.
went to bed earlier, I didn't watch that extra show. I didn't eat that bag of chips or drink another beer. So I
Were
got
you over
home.
at my house last night? Wait a minute here. What the heck? Wait. So there's something wrong with beer, chips, and the show. Thanks a lot, buddy.
Nothing wrong with it. Just don't do it every night, So I started going to bed earlier, and then I started waking up a lot earlier. So
Sure.
having little kids that would wake up at 5, I had to get up at 3:45, 4 in the morning.
Sure.
And why that's powerful is that if you are back on your heels like I was for a while you're just learning, especially as a new business owner. I was a fighter pilot, for crap's sakes. I wasn't in the business of building businesses, but
Sure.
I was determined and stubborn to do it. So I think for me in that space in the morning, whether you, there's a bunch of different things you can do that I've learned over the years. You can pray, you can sit in silence, you can,
Sure.
establish your intentionality for the day, express gratitude. I think gratitude is one of the biggest things that I forgot to do. And as soon as I started sitting back and going, holy smokes, look at all of this. I mean,
Sure.
one, we live in America. Two, we have a house with running water, just even with all the stuff going on in our crazy world nowadays.
Yeah.
So I think all of those are important. But then also, as you establish your intentionality for the day, I started really focusing on pain points and
Okay.
what frustrated me. And so some of the big ones as I started was, accounting, my taxes, my contractors, my subcontractors, just all of these things that I had hired out in some way, shape, or form. And then that really helped me focus in and go, instead of running from the pain, I actually ran towards it. And I go, okay, in
Sure.
3 months, I'm going to take these steps, and I'm either going to remove this person, or I'm going to hire this person, and that kind of helped me establish a framework to jump over those hurdles. But
Sure.
having that putting out fires all day mentality, that
Mhm.
starts if you wake up late and then you wake up to fires that are already going. But if you beat all of that, you
Yeah.
already have your path for the day. So that's
Wow.
really kind of something that really helped me overcome a lot of that, is that by the time 8 9 a.m. rolled around, I had already been awake for 4 or 5 hours,
Yeah.
and I was already done with half of a day of work.
Yeah, that's so cool. Wow. And I want to circle back to something you said, Dominic, because it was really important about the gratitude piece. I got in this simple habit of just being thankful and saying it out loud when I'm thankful for just three things in a day. And I usually do it in the shower. And sometimes it's like, I'm just thankful for hot water. I mean,
Yeah.
to the stuff that we take for granted is so unfortunately taken for granted. And then we miss those things. And then we're just looking at what we don't have. So I just try
Yeah.
to find little simple things. So that was a great one for me, like you said, is to just find some things that you're grateful for. To be able to turn the heat on or the air conditioning or wherever you are, those are just things we don't even really think about. So that's really awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I'm just curious on how did tell me, how did you think that you were going to be a fighter pilot? Was that something you always wanted to do, or how did that come about for you?
Yeah, I think it's different for a lot of people. But what I have found as kind of a trend is that usually if you want to be a fighter pilot, that's kind of, it's not a calling, but I think there's that itch
Hmm.
that you need to kind of scratch as a little kid.
Sure.
I've always loved airplanes. I was that
Okay.
kid that just anytime an airplane flew over, I was looking up in the sky. And there's the kids that chase butterflies or that lick windows or do whatever, right? But I was that kid just kind of in my own world if an airplane was anywhere around. So
Sure.
it started really young. Um, Kind of the story that I tell is that when I was 7, my dad bought me an F4 fighter jet model that we built on my birthday.
Okay.
I actually still have it to this day. Um,
Cool.
and just having that, and then having an uncle that took me on the flight deck for Alaska Airlines, where they were doing engine runs in a big Boeing jet. And at that point, he was a mechanic, and I was like, "Oh, I'll just be a mechanic. This is cool. I could
Yeah.
be around airplanes." But when I saw those mechanics running the motors, I just was looking at literally the best seat in the world, which is the cockpit. And I was
Yeah.
looking out the cockpit, and we're 40, 50 feet off the tarmac or however high that airplane was.
Yeah.
I was like, man, I don't know if I want to. And that was kind of, those were the seeds. And I was like, I didn't
Yeah.
know if I could do it or not. Nobody
Sure.
does.
Yeah.
But I was given that permission throughout the years to just try.
Yeah.
I'll give it a shot.
Wow. So that's so cool. I mean, I like that. Give yourself permission to try. I mean, a lot of times we don't even do that as human beings. We don't give ourselves permission to try something. So
Yeah.
fast forward the tape, then I mean, you're going through high school. I'm assuming it was that urge was building as you got older.
Yes and no, because I really enjoyed playing baseball. So this time of year where we're going into the World Series, I live in Phoenix, so the Diamondbacks are doing pretty well, at least up to
Yeah.
this point. They haven't for the last 20 years or so, but
Yeah,
I
thanks
was
for beating
focused
the
on a lot of
Brewers, by the way.
baseball.
Hey, thanks
But
for beating the Brewers, by the way. You guys you could come into Milwaukee and take two games from us. You weren't even supposed to be there, so
I know.
don't even. You know what? I can't believe we're talking about that. So I'm
I
not
like the underdogs though.
not really
I am
pleased
the
right now, my friend.
Yeah, Dave, I'm the classic underdog. I'm the guy that, and so I like to cheer for the underdogs, and the
Sure.
Diamondbacks are the underdogs right now.
Yeah. Yep.
And
Totally.
I've just always been the underdog. I've always been the youngest in my classes. I've always been the
Okay.
youngest in college. The person that shouldn't have been able to do that. And it actually is a little bit, I think it's maybe personality driven, but especially if I go, you know what? I'm going to be a fighter pilot, or I'm going to start a business, or I'm going to write a book, and somebody
Yeah.
goes, and somebody in a position that matters says, dude, I don't know if you should do that. It almost means that it's guaranteed to happen. And then if somebody is a naysayer and they don't have any authority, they're
Sure.
just they're the villains in the world that are
Yeah.
the Debbie Downers.
Yeah.
That's just so easy for me to look past, and that only adds fuel to my fire. So I
Nice.
know, kind of a long story. It wasn't
Oh,
really. I've always liked airplanes, and I've
sure.
always done things to put myself in a position to kind of learn a little bit more. So I was in Civil Air Patrol when I was in high school, and I was, learning the ropes there, and just kind of when I started college, I went to counselors and I said I want to be a mechanic, and then I met the Dr. Bob Wakefield, who was running the flight school, and I was like, what? I can fly airplanes.
Mm, wow.
And so I started flying at 16, and the rest is history from there.
So how old were you when you got to 800 miles an hour?
That was when I was 20. Let's see here, 21, 22. I was probably about 23 is
Okay.
when I started flying jets.
Jeez. Wow. That's so cool. And you still fly to this day, correct?
Yep, still flying and still loving it. It's so nice to just light myself on fire with American taxpayer dollars and just go flip the
Well,
servers.
hey, you control those skies. You continue to protect us, my friend. We'll be happy to pay that. So I'm just curious. So your call sign is Slice, and I'm
Yep.
just curious, where did that come from for you?
It came from a life lesson that was unceremoniously just gifted to me as being part of a fighter pilot, but it was from a failure. So as a young guy, typically fighter pilots get their call signs from something stupid they do, or it's a play on your name. I mean,
Okay.
when you show up to the squadron, you're known as the FNG, which means effing new guy.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
so you kind of earn your call sign, and a lot of times it unfortunately is because you failed. So in my case, I was, for lack of a better term, I was dogfighting with another instructor pilot, and as a young
Okay.
guy, he was teaching me certain things, and I got overly aggressive throughout the day and ended up breaking a training rule. And I was pointing at his jet for too long, and essentially we had a close pass. His jet went right over the top of mine.
Okay.
Um, like, praise God, we didn't swap any paint. I'm still talking about it. But when it got to the time, I've had a lot of call signs through my career. You get your nicknames and all that kind of stuff. But
Oh, so there's more than one? Okay, because
well,
so you
no. So I
more
mean,
than
people call you a bunch of different things.
okay,
Yeah. So I
gotcha.
mean, it's as it's kind of like morphing until it's like official. Um, but when the squadron got together to give me my call sign, that's the naming or whatever. It's this big
Yeah.
thing. Um, mine was Slice because I tried to slice my instructor pilot in half. Now there was obviously more to the story, but
Sure.
yeah, it was a failure. It was I think it was a little bit embarrassing to me
Sure.
at the time. Um, and I guess what I learned from that was the instructor pilot did a really good job of just, uh, confessing the error and teaching the squadron about it,
Okay.
teaching what we did wrong and showing the
Sure.
tapes. And and just me as a young guy sitting there going, wow, that's really cool. He's just telling everybody that he sucks and he made a mistake, and we're going to get past it and we're going to all learn from it. And then the other piece to it was, it took me too long to just put my stinking pride behind me and
Sure.
just go, hey guys, I suck. I will do better next time. And I think those were a couple of the lessons. Now,
Sure.
I wish I would have gotten past that. I suck. I'll learn. I'll do better next time faster. But such is life.
Well, especially when you're covering their six, right? I mean,
Yep.
you're in a situation where you guys are fighting for each other. In those situations, there's got to be a huge amount of trust built up
Yep.
between your
Yeah,
group,
exactly.
which again, you kind of bring that into business. And if you don't trust your leaders, the chances of you being engaged in your job are pretty weak. And same with leaders, if you don't trust your team and you're always setting them up for failure, you're always trying to catch them doing the wrong things. Those are really dangerous from a group. So, what was the call sign of your instructor? Do you remember? I'm sure you do.
Voodoo, actually.
There you go. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. That is so cool. I love that. So how in the world did this then move into the business side? Because I can see where being a pilot could consume you, that lifestyle, that push into that. How did you then, kind of deviate into business?
Yeah. So it was kind of thought out, but there's a little bit of luck that goes, to being an active duty pilot and moving around. Um, but I grew up, dad and mom owned real estate properties. So I kind of grew up in the real estate, you know, wrenching on houses and putting windows in and collecting rent. And, just I was around that as a little kid. And um, my old man was having a talk with me one night, and he was like, because he's been in the commodities and equities and real estate, like all the different things and
Hmm.
investment, vehicles. And he's like, the one that has just always been the most steady, that's always worked, that you can get to work over time is real estate. And
Hmm.
so I decided to shift directions, years ago. And so I started reading a bunch of books and I started listening to podcasts, and I just went into consumer mode where I just
Sure. Yeah.
read and listened to everything. So even on deployments, guys would call me a nerd or whatever, but I didn't care. But I'd be listening to a book on how to underwrite commercial real estate. And I'd be sitting there, typing in Excel forms and doing, my own practice of like, well, if I see this 10 or 15 unit property, how do I value this thing?
Sure. Sure.
And so then, I would take a 2-year course online about how to, underwrite commercial real estate, and, just kind of going from there. And
Yeah.
I kind of went all in on it.
Okay.
I was like, I know that this can work. So we bought, my wife and I bought our first property, and I was like, wow, it worked. We renovated it and rented it out. And then we bought an 8-unit apartment, a
Wow.
little multifamily property. And then
Yeah.
that's kind of where we got our momentum, is where then we jumped into the syndication aspect of it, where a lot of the fighter pilots and commercial pilots that I know, I said, hey, I know that you guys like real estate. I've built this business. To support passive investors putting their money in this, and I'm going to run it. Is that something that you want to do? And then from there, I spending a lot of time teaching people about what syndication was, because
Okay.
it's not a very well known thing, because it requires a decent chunk of money up front. So it's not like investing in stocks where you
Sure.
can put a little bit in. You kind of have to put a pretty decent chunk of money into these things. So then I wrote a book, because the pain that I was experiencing was 3 to 4 hours sitting down with a prospective investor, only to find out that they didn't, it just wasn't for them. So when
Yeah.
somebody would say, hey, I'm interested in, investing in your company, for one, they'd have to be a friend or somebody that I knew, or somebody
Sure.
that was very closely vetted that was a friend, right? They weren't, so there's all the different rules for syndication, but I would just hand them a book. And and it was so nice, because the
Yeah.
look on their face, they're like, you wrote a book? And I'm like, yeah, I'm not dabbling in this. This is a business for me. Very
Sure.
serious about it. I've been doing it for all these years. Just read that book. It's probably, you can read it in an hour. So sit down, pour yourself a glass of whiskey, and just see what it's all about. And then 90% of the people, it wouldn't be for them, 90
Sure.
plus percent. So, but the book was a very good sales tool for me to just, kind of level up to that next place where I could kind of go, oh, all right, I'm kind of weeding out all of the time that I'm spending,
Sure.
getting investors. So
Wow, that's so cool. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I want to learn about this single seat mindset, because you kind of went from that Viper Ventures into that. So we'll be right back. Awesome. So you then and all of a sudden I see this single seat mindset, and I see like 40 pilots, 40 other people that are willing to contribute. So it looks like you have a large group of pilots that help the business owners that you come in contact with. Is that how
yes,
did that start?
they're kind of two separate businesses. So there's the real estate side of it, where, essentially my friends, my pilot friends, so
Mhm.
most of them are fighter pilots. Um, we do the investing thing and the business thing. The single seat mindset grew, like I said, from a pain point, which was COVID. And I was, mountain biking one morning, And I was like, the young students that were going through because I teach at the schoolhouse. So we
Okay.
teach brand new guys how to start the airplane all the way how to employ it, drop bombs, shoot missiles. So they were struggling because we were on lockdown and different schedules and people had masks on and all of the weirdness of COVID, right?
Yeah.
And so I started sending them little snippets, little messages once a week that leveraged into making a website because I don't like tedious work. And I was like, how do I automate this? So after a couple of classes, I automated it.
Sure.
And at that point, I'd already owned a business, written a book, built websites. So I basically just took what I already knew how to do,
Okay.
made single seat mindset. And it's basically now we're up to 50 fighter pilots.
Wow.
But it's a group of fighter pilots that are looking to help peak performers achieve lofty goals. And I mean, there's a lot more to it, but there's a lot of trends that I started to see as these fighter pilots started writing their stories in the Single Seat Wisdom series books.
Okay.
And you can read them yourself, or there's a lot of things to learn. And I even have a lot of aha and wow moments as I'm reading their chapters of
Sure.
like, oh, well, that makes sense, right? Because he's a fighter pilot and he would do that. But
Yeah.
it's as you read them, you kind of see that trend. And so single seat mindset is a completely different business. And I did that for a couple of reasons. We give all the money to a children's cancer nonprofit. So the Anna Schindler Foundation is who we support, and they build townhomes for families to stay in while their children are going through cancer
Oh,
treatments.
wow. Oh my
So we give the
gosh.
money to that. So all the money goes there just to kind of keep our purpose clean, our
Sure.
why.
Yeah.
And then and then our online resources at singleseatmindset.com, our books. We have a program called the Competent Wingman. There's all of these things that have kind of just grown. But to get back to your point, that probably would not have happened so rapidly had I not already owned a business and kind of done all of the learning pieces. So it was just more me leveraging what I already knew and leveraging that into something different. And then I
Sure.
started talking to guys and I say, hey, what do you think about writing a short story and we'll publish it in a book? And the look on people's faces as they're just staring at me like, dude, we're fighter pilots. We don't not a whole lot of us write stories. And I'm like, well, I'm going to do it. And so I talked to, no kidding, 198 fighter pilots to get the first 20 stories. So I just a
Those
stubborn,
178
determined
are kind of
person.
wishing. 178 are kind of wishing they would have took you up on it
Oh,
now.
I don't know. I don't. Well, the other piece of it too is that every single fighter pilot author has contributed money to the Anna Schindler Foundation. So I was hoping to get $100,000, but we're just shy of 40 grand right now.
Okay.
Going to the foundation. But the fighter pilots, every single fighter pilot to be part of the project, not only are they, this is a word that's very contested, especially if you're a fighter pilot, a peak performer, but there's a little vulnerability that goes into that.
Yeah.
You're putting your story out there for people to read and to pick apart.
Yeah.
So there's that piece to it. There's work. They're working professionals. They've got families and lives that they're living. So they got to put time in there. And then I'm asking them, so this is the marketing piece from a business aspect that was tough is, hey, you're going to do all this work and, be vulnerable and put yourself out there. But then also you got to give some money to this foundation to be part of the project. It's voluntary, but if you don't do it, then you can't be part of the project. So,
well, I'll tell you, Dominic, you bring up a really good word that we talk about a lot, and that is vulnerability. And, a lot of us entrepreneurs, business owners really struggle with that. And, but yet, so for the listener, if a fighter pilot, which in our mind are probably one of the most masculine, and I know there's women on that are fighter pilots, so I don't want to offend them. I just, from my perspective, I think of it as such a masculine type thing. But yet, here's a guy saying you need to be vulnerable in that. So that kind of transcends over into that business as well, where if you're not going to be vulnerable, sure, don't expect your team to be vulnerable. Don't expect your clients to be vulnerable. And then it's kind of like really, it's artificial. I mean, it's fake, it's plastic, and we really don't know what's going on. So you teach about there's not really failure, but it's learning. So I'm just curious, is it, in some ways, is that semantics, or is there really, do you really look at failure as a learning experience, or how do you help people with that?
Yeah. And I wish I had kind of come up with that concept myself, but there's, I don't remember who said it. Was it Gandhi or maybe Tony Robbins or, one of the quotes, and I don't know who's attributed to, but I either have learning experiences or winning experiences. And what that means is the learning experiences are the failures.
Yeah.
And so as in our culture, and American fighter pilots and other countries have learned how to do this as well, but the debrief is a very tough part of being a fighter pilot early on, because that's where you're going to see all your mistakes. And when you're starting out, you have a ton of mistakes.
Sure.
Especially as a new guy, you're learning a lot.
Yeah.
And just realize, when I said you're learning a lot, you're failing a lot. Now, you have not an infinite, but a lot of little mistakes, and they're and again, another quote, you either, what are they, I think it was Tony Robbins that said, the failures don't define you, and I'm butchering the quote now, but they don't let those failures define you.
Sure.
Because the failure is an event, not a person. That's what I was trying to say. So those little events that happen, I mean, a story from the other day, right? So I'm out there flying with a student. We're going above the speed of sound. We're intercepting groups, and he's learning a lot and he's learning. This is new. He's working with me to find other jets to essentially shoot them, and then go find other jets and shoot them. And we're doing air-to-air learning, right? And again, it's in a training environment, so that other jets are like not dying. But we come back, and he has a pretty good sortie. We have a pretty good flight. I land, and I see this jet go around with the landing gear down, and we don't do that. We put the landing gear up on the go. That's part of our go around procedures. Well, so we go through our whole debrief, and he's got some stuff to work on, but he's also doing stuff good. And then at the end of it, I go, hey, I just want to look at what was going on in that traffic pattern. And we've got all the tapes, we got all the data right in front of us. And again, part of this process is the painful process. And he's watching his tapes, and he's watching that the landing gear is down, and just looking at his face, I was like, dude, your situational awareness is so low at this point that you just didn't finish one of the most basic things that you've learned from undergraduate pilot training, which is the go around procedures. You got to put your landing gear up. You got to push your power up, climb away from the ground, put your landing gear up, check your configuration, accelerate, like all the basic things.
Yeah.
And he just could not even believe it. And so I sprint out, and we, there's a pilot that's getting ready to take off in that aircraft. And we're like, dude, you cannot use that aircraft. we have to swing the landing gear. But that story is part of the learning process. I've had plenty of those experiences as well, where I come back, I was doing on my second deployment. So I'm pretty experienced at this point. My targeting pod recycled power as I'm getting ready for an attack, and I didn't arm up my combat laser the correct way. And even though the attack didn't get botched and it worked out, it was super embarrassing to admit that that was part of my checklist. That was part of the thing that I missed. But hey, other people realize if your targeting pod recycles power, you need to turn your laser back on, just those little things. So I 100% wholeheartedly view my failures. And even in business, I underwrote the landscaping portion incorrectly on my second or third apartment. And Dave, I spent, and this is, I don't have this kind of money. I spent $110,000 of my own money so that the project didn't tank. And it wasn't fun at the time. There was a lot of expletives and just, like literally come to Jesus moments of how did I miss this? But fast forward 3 months, I look back and I went, to go through college for a 4-year degree, let's say it costs $125,000. I'm like, well, I just got $125,000 education in 3 months.
Yep.
So it's
you'll never do that again, right?
Nope, haven't. I haven't.
Wow. Well, and I think that debrief thing is so powerful when you think about that, Dominic, because we as entrepreneurs, we tend to just keep moving forward and we sometimes don't learn from our mistakes. Now,
Yep.
it sounded like that pilot might have had a blind spot where they really didn't see something that everybody else saw. And that's so normal for us in business, right? We have this blind spot that we can't see, but everybody sees, and we don't, our pride gets in the way and we're not listening to anybody and they don't know what they're talking about. And, but I think about the best athletes in the world. They all have these coaches looking out. They're standing outside their swing or their shot or whatever, and they're there to critique that. I couldn't imagine Tiger Woods being where he is if he said, "I don't need any coaches. I can do this myself." Right?
Yeah.
So do you guys at Single Seat Mindset, do you come alongside people like that? Do you look and see yourself as a coach, or where do you fit into the whole equation?
Yeah. So as a fighter pilot, I think there's one of the words that really stuck with me, because you kind of explained to me, Dave, is the guy that won't listen to a lot of people, that maybe should be a little bit more humble. And, and I think the important thing is, well, how do you pick that apart if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a business
Yeah.
owner, if you want to get past that? And I think maybe some building blocks. If somebody is a naysayer and they're tearing you down and they're just the villain, and you're
Mm-hmm.
trying to build up, you need to ask yourself, what authority does that person have? So just not verbally, don't attack the person. That's not
Sure.
helpful, but just
Yep.
go, hey, what has this person done? So what I found when I started college and I was going through my civilian flight school, and I was a civilian flight instructor, and I wanted to be a fighter pilot. And if people found out about that and then they started negatively attacking me, it was very easy to discount them. One, if they weren't a pilot. So if they
Mm-hmm.
weren't a pilot in the first place, I automatically just would listen to them and just go into bobblehead mode.
Okay.
Okay, you don't know what you're talking about, but I'm going to do this.
Sure.
Now, here's the fantastic thing. If I asked a fighter pilot, and this is really where I got my accelerated acceleration. Some of the professors in the college were retired fighter pilots. And I
Sure.
remember talking to Harley Davidson. Harley was his call sign, and his last name is Davidson. And I was like, "Hey, Harley, I'm this young kid, and I'm like, I'm taking flight lessons. I'm taking all of these aviation classes, and I really want to be a fighter pilot." And he looks at me, and he's like, "Hell, kid, if I did it, you can do it." And that was just permission,
Yeah.
from a guy that has
Yeah.
authority, that's been around the block, that's done there. And he's like, "Dude, just do it." He
That's
goes,
cool.
"Be a fighter pilot. Like, here are some of the basic, you're already doing this stuff."
Yeah.
But I think it's a lot of time, it's all that noise that can kind of drag you down. The important piece, though, is that there needs to be your inner circle, your five most influential people that you hang around, or whoever those happen to be.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the people that you need to have a coach and a guide, because there's no such thing as the self-made man. There's always somebody that kind of helps that person along in one way, shape, or form. And so
Wow.
I had that in the form of the chief pilot,
Yeah.
my parents, just some people around me. They're like, "Heck yes, get after it and go do it."
That's so cool. Well, and maybe maybe somebody listening today could be that encourager for somebody else, because we all need that encouragement, and it's much safer to say nothing, right? It's easy to walk through life and just mind your own business and keep your head down. But boy, I tell you, there's something powerful in encouraging other people and then seeing that dream come to fruition. So thank you so much for sharing that. As we start to land the plane today, no pun intended, I'm curious, what advice do you give what's your number one advice piece that you tend to see people, really gravitate towards, that you've learned in your journey?
So to answer that question is like, what, and I want to clarify. So you're asking, what would I do if I could go back to my younger
Yeah.
self?
Yep.
Yeah. So I think, I kind of hinted at it at the beginning of this podcast episode, which is, a lot of times I entered the day, my feet would roll out of bed and I would start sprinting.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't, as much as that worked for so many years, I found myself in kind of like a stock market boom bust cycle. I was my own Federal Reserve printing money and cashing checks that I didn't have, And so I would accelerate, I would achieve a bunch of things, and then I would have these big crashes. And I'd be like, okay, what did I learn? I'd pick myself up again. And so I was learning and I was getting places, but it was exhausting. And I think, if I was a business owner or entrepreneur, I'm like, just give me one thing that I can do. And that one thing is I started out trying to sit still every morning for 15 minutes and I failed miserably because I just don't like to sit still. I want to do stuff. I'm like an action taker. And that's
Yeah.
how I learn.
Yeah.
But I whittled that down to 5 minutes. And
Okay.
and I call it 5 minutes for freedom, 5 minutes for whatever you want. But if you don't have 5 minutes in the morning to clarify where you're going during the day,
Yeah.
then your guess is as good as mine how your day is going to end up, because you're going to be putting out fires all day. So for me, just sitting down in the morning and looking at my notes. And so if you don't take notes like I did for a lot of years, start taking notes, because you'll laugh at yourself and that helps you with your pride. And you'll start to see some trends of things that really don't matter that you thought were a big deal.
Wow. That's
right.
cool.
And so those 5 minutes in the morning, I just sit down, I go, where am I going today? If I, at the end of the day, when I'm debriefing myself, I go, I did this one thing. And that one thing could be, I'm focusing on my family today, or I am going to try my best to not tinker with the business and look at my cell phone and, all those things, but write it down. And just those 5 minutes, they're so important to just focus your day. What's my intention today?
Wow, that's so cool.
Do one thing a day for 365 days a year. You'll get somewhere.
Well, it's funny because no man that I know really wants to journal, right? Use that J around people and they're just like, shut up, right? But you just said take notes. That's like totally different. I'm like, I can take notes, right? So I love that little shift in that. So last question, I'm gonna let you go. So what if people want to learn more about the single seat mindset, what's the best place to go or to reach out to you? How do people get a hold of you, Dominic?
Yeah. So singleseatmindset.com. We're single seat fighter pilots. And that's where you can find all the goodness. We have a free program on there. And I've had people reach out to us and go, hey, my son's really interested in aviation. Like, send me your address. I'll send you a book. So I'm not it is a business, but the money goes to a charitable cause, and we're just giving back, right? Maybe it's out of guilt, but singleseatmindset.com. And then more importantly, if your listeners have listened this far, if you go to singleseatmindset.com and put /podcast gift, all one word, all lowercase, singleseatmindset.com /podcast gift, the first 3 listeners that go there, I will send them a copy of Single Seat Wisdom Volume 1 for completely free. And there's no strings attached.
Awesome. Yeah. Wow. And that's got to be some killer wisdom. So there's only 2 copies left because Dave's getting one. So no, I'll pay for mine because I want your money. I want the money to go to the cancer people. That's fantastic. So, wow, Dominic, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for opening up your life and your journey. And it's so refreshing to be able to see somebody that's in such a position, but yet vulnerable and able to learn from their mistakes. And so, yeah, I was trying to think of what in the world my call sign would be. And now if you have to name it based on a failure, then I'm like, now I have to rethink this. So I'm going to give this some thought and let you know, Dominic, but man, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for hanging out with us today.
Thanks, Dave. I had a really good time.